different trajectories would also emphasize why the Protestant world slowly over time pushed our Blessed Mother completely out of the equation, whereas Catholics have always had a high, honorable devotion to Our Lady.
One other story if I can share. Do you know the story about the peasant that in Ars, and the curé of Ars, who found the peasant in the church? You remember this one? A little peasant man would come into the church every day and spend hours in front of the tabernacle and the Blessed Sacrament. And the curé was very impressed with his devotion, and he stopped him one day and said, What do you say? What are you doing there in prayer? And he says, well, I look at him and he looks at me. And that spoke so beautifully to what the Catholic Church is about.
He may not be able to explain it theologically,
sure,
but he knew our Lord Jesus. All right, we've got an email from Bruce. He says, good evening. Eve's sin was an act of the will which occurs in the mind. Is this sin instilled in us when we receive our soul, which comes from God Himself? Why would our Lord create us in sin? Thank you, Bruce, for theological.
We're getting into heavy-duty stuff here. Yeah, This is a great question. All right. A critical difference, there's a very critical difference in understanding the Catholic teaching on original sin and the Protestant teaching on original sin. All right. The Protestant teaching on original sin is that original sin is a vitiation of our nature, that our nature becomes evil, and so no matter what you do, however outwardly good it may seem, it is inwardly vitiated. That my theology professors use the example of a glass of water with a drop of ink. The ink covers everything and makes it all corrupt. Okay, that's the Protestant view of original sin. The Catholic view of original sin is this. Original sin is not a positive corruption of our nature. What God makes is good, you're correct, and it cannot be evil. The created world is good. Original sin is a privation of original justice. What that means is that Adam and Eve were created in a perfect, loving fellowship with God that was not merited. It was a gift of God. Okay, God granted this to them by a supernatural act. When they willfully chose to sin, God removed that sanctifying grace, that deprivation of sanctifying grace. Coming into the world without being intrinsically in relationship with God is what we mean by original sin in a Catholic context, not the deprivation of our nature. And therefore, justification, salvation, is sanctifying grace is the restoration of that relationship that was lost to Adam and Eve. All right. So it's a very different conception. And you're right. Our nature is good. God doesn't create anything evil. That's Manichaeism.
All right. A call from Jesse from Kentucky. Hello, Jesse. What's your question?
Hi, Marcus. Nice to speak with you, and hi to your guest. Mm-hmm. I was wondering what church fathers can I quote to prove that the church has always believed in devotion to Mary? Because I have Protestant friends who said they've read the church fathers and don't see her in there anywhere. All right. Thanks.
Thanks, Jesse. Great question.
Well, you need to take a look at St. Irenaeus, 2nd century father. You need to look at Tertullian, and I would also recommend there's an essay by Cardinal Newman on exactly this topic.
Oh, yes. Okay? Yes.
And the title escapes me, but if you Google search it, you're going to find Newman's essay on Mary. And the constant teaching of the Church Fathers, is that Mary is the second Eve. All right? Now, you have to rework this through the Church Fathers' understanding of the nature of salvation again. Okay? The idea of the Church Fathers is that Christ's incarnation, His divinity is joined with our humanity and fundamentally transforms it. So Jesus, being the second Adam, creates a new race of spiritual men and women. Okay. Now, if that's the case, if the incarnation is the keystone of our salvation because it's the transformation of our nature, all right, then Mary plays a critical role. She's not just some sort of receptacle. All right. She is actually the medium through which the incarnation takes place. And as Jesus is the second Adam, the Church Fathers all taught that Mary is the second Eve. Now, all you have to do is unpack that concept of the second Eve, and every Marian dogma falls into place. If she's the second Eve, then she has to be created in the same state of original justice that the first Eve was created in, hence her Immaculate Conception. All right. Her continued sinlessness. And so go look at Irenaeus, look at Justin Martyr, Tertullian, and then find Newman's essay on Mary.
For some reason I was thinking that it was called Second Eve. by Newman, isn't it? Maybe I'm wrong on that one.
There's more than one version of it published, and one of them's edited and truncated, and I don't remember the title.
Okay, all right. But they'll find it on the internet, so, or maybe even on EWTN.com, the resources that are available on the, do a search for Mary. Well, your computer will fill overflowing on all of EWTN's resources on Mary, but I'm sure you could find some information, of course. Email, well, at least one last email. Dear Dr. Anders, if you are not saved by faith alone, what else is required? What can we add to Jesus' sacrifice for us? Thank you, Jim, for that email.
Okay. Well, I'm going to tell you what St. Paul says, and I'll tell you what Jesus says, and I'll tell you what the Church Fathers say. We are saved 100% by grace. All right? We can do nothing of our own. All right? But God rewards His own gifts. The whole nature of salvation is that it will be a transformation of our nature, not just the imputation of Christ's righteousness, but our renovation. All right? And in His divine plan, He has chosen to reward our free response that takes place through this gift of grace. Can I do anything that's intrinsically of its own worthy of eternal happiness? Well, of course not. Of course not. But God chooses to give me eternal happiness through this process of the renovation of my nature, because that's what salvation means. It's being transformed from a life of sin into a life of holiness. And that's the teaching of the Scriptures, Romans chapter 2, book of Matthew.
Well, something else you said earlier also, that faith is an act of the will, not merely of the intellect.
Sure.
I mean, that's when you're thinking of faith as accepting Jesus as God or something, as opposed to faith. If that's true, then I'll live differently. I mean, that's a part of what faith is. David, thank you very much for joining us on the program.
Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it.
You have a website, though, in case someone wants to contact you.
Calvin to Catholic, CALVIN, 2, Catholic.com.
So Calvin apologetic?
Yeah, it's got some links on there, articles I've written, and so forth. So I used to be a Calvinist, now I'm a Catholic, so CalvinToCatholic.com.
So you fight the battles and the internet war.
That's right.
All right.
Okay.
David,
thank you very much.